Okay, so picture this. You're driving off the lot, that new car smell hitting you, and you can't wait to try out all the cool tech, right?
Right.
But have you ever thought about all the tech you don't see?
Like what?
Like the engine parts, the braking systems, all the safety stuff that you really need to work when you need it?
Yeah, true. You don't really think about it until something goes wrong.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. The behind the scenes of how car manufacturers make sure that stuff is top notch. We're talking ISO 9301.2015 audits, the gold standard for quality management.
Yeah, those audits are pretty intense.
We'll be using an episode of the Auditor Training podcast to guide us. We'll find out why these audits are so important, especially in the car industry where safety is paramount. Trust me, after listening to that podcast, I learned a lot about just how much goes into making sure your car is built to last.
Oh yeah, there's way more to it than people realize.
For sure. One thing that really surprised me was how much work goes into these audits before they even step foot in a factory.
Yeah, it's not just showing up with a checklist. The pre-assessment and planning phase is crucial.
So it's like gathering intel before you even start.
Think of it like a detective building a case. You wouldn't just barge in without understanding the situation.
Right, you need to do your research.
Exactly. Auditors need to get the full picture of a company's quality management system before they can even begin the audit. It's like a doctor. They wouldn't prescribe treatment without examining the patient and getting their full history, would they?
True, you need all the facts first. And in the car industry, one little faulty part could be really dangerous.
Exactly. That's why they're so careful. One thing they really emphasize in the auditor training episode is product traceability.
Product traceability. What's that all about?
It means being able to track every single part back to where it came from. That way, if there's ever a problem, let's say a faulty batch of brake pads, they can find every single car that has those pads.
Oh, so they can do a recall more effectively?
Precisely. It's all about minimizing risk and maintaining trust. You know, like that whole Takata airbag recall a while back. That's a great example of why product traceability is so important.
Oh, right, yeah. That was a huge deal. They were able to identify the affected cars so quickly because of that traceability, right?
Exactly. And that's the power of it. It helps prevent accidents and saves lives. In the car industry, safety is non-negotiable.
So you've got the pre-assessment, setting everything up, but then the auditors actually get to the factory, then what?
That's where the real work begins, the on-site audit. That's when they make sure that what's written down actually lines up with what's happening.
So no more just relying on a stack of procedures. Now they want to see it in action.
Exactly. It's all about confirming everything. They use a three-pronged approach, really. Talking to people, reviewing the documentation, and getting their hands dirty observing processes in action.
So let's break each of those down. First, what's involved with the whole talking to people part?
Well, auditors, they interview staff at all levels of the company, you know, from the people on the assembly line to those in top management.
Wow, so they really get into all levels.
Oh, yeah. It helps them see how well the quality procedures are actually understood, and not just understood, but actually implemented consistently.
So it's like to make sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to quality.
Precisely. And this is where the documentation comes in for the next stage of the audit.
Right, because especially with cars, having everything written down is essential, right?
Oh, it's absolute crucial. They look at everything. Quality manuals, those flowcharts of processes, inspection reports, even training records.
Wow, they really do look at everything.
They have to. They need to make sure the company's documentation is in line with all those strict ISO 9001.201T requirements.
Makes sense. They need to make sure those procedures are written down and also actually followed. But it's not just about taking someone's word for it, is it?
You got to observing the action is next, and this is where it gets really interesting. Auditors aren't just stuck in some room reading documents all day. They're out on the factory floor watching how things are put together, how inspections are done, and how they deal with any issues that come up.
That's got to be critical for car manufacturing, where even a tiny mistake could mean big problems.
Exactly. And you know what they really focus on? How companies deal with what they call non-conformances. Basically, when something goes wrong.
Like a part that isn't working or a machine breaks down.
Yeah, things like that. Even if someone doesn't follow the documented procedure. Say, if a certain type of weld isn't done to the specifications, that's a non-conformance.
And with cars, that could be a huge safety issue.
Absolutely. And that's why they want to see how companies document, investigate, and most importantly, prevent those situations from happening again.
Yeah.
It's all about constantly finding ways to improve.
So they're not just there to find problems. They also want to make sure the company actually learns from any mistakes and comes out stronger.
Right. The goal is to build a culture where everyone's on board with creating the very best product possible.
Okay, so the audit's done. They've done interviews, checked all the paperwork, and seen everything on the factory floor. What happens next? So the audit's done, they've finished the interviews, they've gone through mountains of paperwork, and seen the factory floor in action. What's next? They don't just give a thumbs up or thumbs down, do they?
You're right, it's definitely more complex than that. Next comes the reporting and findings. Think of it kind of like a coach reviewing game footage with their team.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so what kind of game footage are we talking about here?
Well, they'll highlight what went well, of course, but also point out areas for improvement, how to up their game next time.
So the audit report is like a roadmap for getting better.
Yeah, exactly. It breaks down everything the auditors saw, including any of those nonconformances we talked about, those little hiccups. But it's not just about listing problems. It goes further and provides suggestions for fixing things, for taking action.
So it's a real collaborative thing, not just pointing fingers.
Exactly. And this is where that whole major versus minor nonconformance thing comes into play.
Right. A major one sounds serious. What makes it major?
A major nonconformance, that's a sign of a bigger problem, something systemic, or a big deviation from that ISO standard. For example, let's say a company doesn't have a process for calibrating their equipment, like at all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a major issue. You can impact the quality and safety of every product.
Yikes. That's a big one. And a minor nonconformance.
A minor one is, like you said, more minor. Think of it as more localized. Maybe a document is missing a signature, or a piece of equipment needs routine maintenance, but they're behind. It's not ideal, but doesn't mean the whole system is messed up.
So depending on how serious the nonconformance is determines how quickly and how big of a fix they need.
Exactly. And that brings us to the closing meeting.
Ah, okay. So this is where the auditors sit down with the company's management and lay it all out, right?
Exactly. It's a chance to make sure everyone's on the same page, understands the good and the bad, and most importantly, come up with a game plan together. The auditors aren't just going to drop a report on their desk and peace out. They want to help the company improve.
So it's a real partnership, not just a one-and-done audit.
You got it. In fact, the ISO standard actually requires companies to have a solid plan for tackling those nonconformances. Assigning people to get it done, setting deadlines, making sure those corrective actions happen.
So no sweeping it under the rug. There's accountability built right in.
Absolutely. And even then, auditors often stay involved. They might pop back in for a follow-up audit to make sure those corrective actions actually worked and that the company's making real progress toward those quality goals.
So it sounds like these audits aren't just about catching companies messing up. They're really about fostering this environment of continuous improvement, always getting better.
You hit the nail on the head. The companies that really thrive, they don't see these audits as a chore, but as a chance to fine-tune their processes, make even better products, and build a culture of quality throughout the whole company.
That's awesome. Next time I'm driving, I'm going to be thinking about all those rigorous audits, all that work that goes on behind the scenes just to make sure my car is safe and reliable.
It really makes you appreciate it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All those standards, the processes, the dedicated people, all working to achieve that same goal, automotive excellence. And every time you turn that key, you're benefiting from all of that.
It really puts it into perspective. It's amazing to think about how much goes into something we often take for granted.
I know, right?
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of ISO 900001.201 Hein audits in automotive manufacturing.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Always a pleasure. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. Until next time, drive safe.